Welcome back to an all-new episode of the Yank and the Brit. I'm the Yank. He's a Brit.
Brit.
Yeah. And we got a special guest, Ben Rock. You are best known for your work with the Blair Witch Project. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was the production designer on the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, not the...
Also, I created a bunch of the backstory as well.
Cool. Now, Reese is a huge fan of this stuff, to put it lightly. So, Reese, I'm sure you have most of the questions this week, so go ahead.
We start off with questions already?
Yeah, I mean, might as well.
Already.
Okay.
Don't give him a softball either.
Softball, alright.
Ask something about Blair Witch. No one asked me before. Come on. Bring it.
Oh, but I've asked you like everything. Okay. Whose idea was it to go in and start fucking with the tent in the middle of the night? Because it takes a special kind of twisted mind to do that. So I want to know whose decision that was. Or was it just always there?
That was always, I would probably credit that to Ed and Dan, Eduardo Sanchez and Dan Meyer, who I will refer to as Ed and Dan. Those guys, like, they kind of worked out a whole outline of it. But I will say that was one of the few times where there were a lot of ideas that kind of went into that particular scene, and I think that my contribution to it was to hear the kids, like to hear the sound of kids in the middle of the woods, which wakes them up. And I had been advocating for something that I think is ridiculous and impractical now with my much more adult brain, because I was 25, 26 when I worked on that, and it was that I wanted to bury the speakers underground. So it came from underneath them, and they didn't know where it was coming from. Like, I had this really grand plan.
Underneath the tent?
Correct. That location was one of the few places where we actually set their tent up for them, rather than them just showing up and setting it up. And so we had set that tent up the way that it was, so that when they ran out of the tent, that they would go in a straight path. And then we had, when Heather starts screaming, "What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that?" We had this guy who was dressed like head to toe in basically thermal underwear, but it was all white. And he was kind of standing up, and we were just hoping that like a ghostly image of him would show up in the film. But of course, nothing showed up, and that was probably for the best. But we brought a lot of people out there that night. But we had preset their tent, so there was really only one direction Heather could run, because if they'd set their own tent up, when they ran out, they could have run in the completely wrong direction. You know, so that was like we had to be.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, and also that scene was one of the only ones that we ever did more than once. And the reason was there were so many people to drag out into the middle of the woods where we were. It was probably a 45-minute hike into the woods, and that night there were probably 15 people in the woods executing different parts of that gag. And the first night, by the time we were able to get everyone out there, the sun had started coming up. And if you're a filmmaker, you know, once you see a little blue in the sky, 5 minutes later it's too bright and it looks like morning. So we shot it once and then had to come back and do it the second time, which to a degree takes out the element of surprise, because they knew what we were going to do to them, but they didn't know some of the things we were going to do afterwards, like, you know, fuck up Josh's stuff and cover it with KY jelly and stuff like that.
Okay, so here's an idea, okay? How we're going to do this. Because me asking you questions is cool, but if I was a Blair Witch fan, which I am, but if I was a Blair Witch fan that's not me, and I didn't already know all this stuff, or most of it, through already harassing you for months, there would be certain things that I would want to know. Like, what was in the bundle? That was the very first fucking thing I ever asked you, Ben. You remember that? Because that's been bothering me since I was like 10 and I first saw it. What was in it? Tell the people. Clarify, Ben.
What's in the bundle?
Uh-huh.
Well, what's in the bundle? So the bundle is it's teeth with blood on it, and they're actual real human teeth. It was a mix. So Greg Hale, our producer, had gone to a dentist friend of his, and got some teeth that I guess he pulled out. And, you know, they were clean. We weren't like, you know, they weren't, they'd been sterilized, I hope. And then I also had like some fake denture, some like acrylic teeth that I bought from a dental supply. and I covered them with this blood called thick blood that's like the consistency of peanut butter, sort of. And it's in a pouch made out of a swatch of Josh's shirt, and some of his hair is in there as well, wrapped up and then put into a bundle of sticks. Now, the bundle of sticks gag was always one of my favorite ones before we shot it. And Ed and Dan would always give the actors specific notes in these little plastic photo canisters. And that day, I put the bundle of sticks in front of their tent, and they didn't give Heather or Mike the note to open the bundle of sticks. So they just thought it was a bundle of sticks, and if you watch the movie, you'll see Heather picks it up and throws it away. And that is one of the few times, like, I knew that if they weren't told to do it, they were so worn down to the nub at that point. They were exhausted. They'd been in the woods pretty much for 8 days. They'd gotten out once because of rain, but for the most part, they'd been in the woods for 8 days, living in a tent, living together, eating less and less food. Like, you know, like what we were doing to them was pretty insane. And so I drove out there, and I never broke scenario. Like, this is the only time I had broke scenario in the whole thing. But I came across Heather and Mike, and I said, "Hey guys, you know, did you open the sticks, the bundle of sticks?" And Heather was like, "No," and Mike was like, "Look, man, we just did this whole scene, and it was a really good scene, and it was really true, and I don't want to go back into that headspace again." And Heather was like, "Fine, fuck it, I'll go open the fucking bundle of sticks." So I'm walking back to the car in the woods, and when Heather opens that bundle of sticks, she shrieks. In the movie, every time I watch the movie, I hear it. I was in the woods when that happened, when she opened that thing up and saw, you know, like, I feel like, you know, the analog high 8 camera that all of her footage was shot on doesn't bring it across. That's why people are always like, I think it's fingers, I think it's this, I think it's that. I'm like, no, it's teeth. It's teeth and hair and blood. That's really all it is. But when she saw it, it was pretty gnarly. And that, like, I had a moment, you know, where like the hair stood up on the back of my neck. In reality, when I watch the movie today, like, that shriek always kind of brings me back to that moment where I heard it happen when it happened, and it's so genuine. And again, I think just because Heather's a phenomenal actress, and that helps. But also, she was just so completely worn down that I think seeing something that shocking in living color, you know, in real life, just, it took her over the edge. And I sort of feel like that moment brought her to a fucked up place in her own mind as an actor, that she doesn't really come back from for the rest of the movie. I feel like that's why she's like so on edge for the remainder of the movie.
To me, the bundle of sticks, and it might be a little bit off in terms of, you know, segmentation or whatever. To me, when they open the bundle, that is the precise moment that it's just gone. Like, with the newer Blair Witch, they had a kind of similar moment, and I'll get to that in a minute. But to me, the way I look at it is, as soon as she opens that bundle, they realize precisely how fucked they are. Before that, they're kind of like, I don't like this, we gotta fucking leave, and then she opens that, and then it just gets so very real very quickly. That's how I feel about it. The thing I was going to say about Blair Witch, which you obviously had like nothing to do with, which is
the new sequel. I didn't work on the sequel at all.
No, they had a similar moment that didn't quite hit as hard because it's kind of goofy, and it's with the stick man and the voodoo shit, right? That was kind of their version of that. Happened a bit earlier. Didn't really hit as hard, and I think it's because it was just a little bit too over the top. You know what I mean? It left a lot to your imagination just to see. I mean, I'm not bagging on the movie. I liked it, but
I liked it a lot.
It's more scary to me to just open an unassuming bundle of sticks and see some grotesque shit in it. The implications of it are horrifying. To me, that's a little bit more unsettling than just straight up seeing someone snap in half.
I don't know. I really enjoyed the snapping bit myself, as just going into that movie kind of blind after not having seen the original for decades at this point, probably.
Yeah,
I watch
him out
once a month.
You got me beat, brother. I mean, it came out 17 years ago, 18 years ago. I mean, look, this is my biggest concern, since I didn't work on the reboot in 2016. was that they were going to play fast and loose with the mythology or do like outwardly cheesy things, and I was actually pleasantly surprised. You can't make a movie like that and not embellish or change the mythology a little bit. Like, that's to be expected, I think. But they were pretty respectful to it, and adding stuff like that might not have been an idea I would have personally pushed for, but I think it's valid, and it was a good scare moment in the movie. That's really what you need, Like, the movie's got to be scary, and the problem is, I feel like it has to show more than the first one did. So, I just don't think audiences are going to be tolerant with the $25,000 version of the movie that we made again, here and now. And, I would argue for, not that anyone obviously wanted to know my opinion at Lionsgate, but I would argue for doing the origin story about Ellie Kedward and not making another found footage Blair Witch movie. But I think their thinking was that they made another movie and it wasn't like the first one and it tanked. And then Paranormal Activity was super successful, and all it did was repeat the same idea over and over again. So why
Wasn't
not
that
figure
made
out
for
a way
like
to...
10 grand?
The first one, yeah.
I've heard 15, but yeah, I mean, very little, very fucking little. And in fact, I'm sure that I don't think the first one did as well as Blair Witch did when you adjust it for inflation, but like in aggregate, they've made like 5 of them, and they all have made a metric fuck ton of money. And the thing is that I think they spend like $5 or $6 million on each one. And I know the guy who DP'd the most recent one, and he didn't tell me this, but he told a mutual friend of ours this, that they just planned to shoot those movies like 3 times. Like, not pickups, but they reshoot the whole fucking movie like 3 times. Like, they refine the idea by filming it, which is an interesting idea. But that's what you can do if you have a crew of 4 people, which is, I think, how they do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
A big draw of I mean, I guess it's kind of a tangent, but to me, the big draw of Paranormal Activity is they're very creative with their scares. Like, one of my favorite scary moments, whatever you want to call it, I'm hesitant to call it a jump scare, even though it is, but I hate those, and I like this, so I'm in that strange grey area. Was in the 3rd movie, there is a moment where, I think it's the mother, she walks into the kitchen, and she's just looking around, and she's like, and you don't realize something's wrong, and then everything falls from the ceiling, and you don't realize until that happens that everything was gone. Like, I saw that in the theater, and I was like, what the fuck is she looking so confused for? And then everything comes down, and I'm like, oh shit, and
I think a lot of times they don't, like, they don't make those movies the way that we made Blair Witch, but they do. I think they'll put an actor in a situation, in a scene, and the actor doesn't know what the gag is going to be. So the actor's kind of like, if I walked into this room and I thought that there was a ghost in here, I might be on high alert, but I wouldn't know that, my bookshelf was going to fall over versus a horrible sound was going to come out of my speakers, whatever it is.
So whenever you were making Blair Witch, did you guys know that you were going to go in with these actors not really knowing what was going on, or was that a game plan that was made on the fly?
No, that was the plan from over a year. When I was first pitched the idea, so Greg Hale, who was one of the 2 producers on Blair Witch, he pitched me. He and I went to film school with all the guys who worked on Blair Witch, but I was hanging out with Greg. He lived about a block away from me, and he told me that I learned about the Blair Witch the way a lot of people did, in that Greg said to me, and he knows that I'm way into paranormal stuff, like I subscribe to the 40 End Times and all this stuff, and he was like, you ever heard of the Blair Witch? And I said, you mean the Bell Witch? And he's like, no, the Blair Witch. And then he told me a very the first pass version of the mythology. Like, the mythology hadn't really kind of gotten where it was, but it was always presented as folklore. And then he said, you know Ed Sanchez, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, he's from Maryland. And I'm like, yeah, he's from, of course. And he said, well, Ed had these friends that he went to college with who went off and made a documentary about it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he said, yeah, but they disappeared. And I'm like, no fucking way. And he was like, yeah, and here's the crazy part. We have their film. And I was like, no. So, yeah, I mean, like, it was just a really exciting thing to hear. So I was kind of brought into it the way everybody was brought into it. And so when Greg told me what the idea was, so this is like, we're talking like 1996. We made the movie in 1997, so it was probably at least a year before we made it. It might have been 1995, probably. He told me that the plan was to put actors in an improvisational situation where they don't really know what's going on and have them make a documentary about it. And I think even at that time, the idea was to put them in the woods for a week. Now, the only real difference between what we actually shot, and what he pitched me then was the idea at the beginning was to just give them a film camera. So the stuff would be cut together with the film. And the other part of it, by the way, was that the movie, as it was, the finished thing that you would have seen, and I don't think this would have worked nearly as well, would have been an analysis of the footage that they had. So it would be a fake documentary where you talk to a photo expert and they go through the footage frame by frame and say, you see this, you see that, blah, blah, blah. And, here's archival footage of Rustin Parr, blah, blah, blah. Like, it would be like a straightforward History Channel style documentary kind of a thing. It was also Greg, and I don't think he gets enough credit for this, who suggested buying a cheap video camera and giving it to Heather and just having her roll on everything. And that ends up being, 9/10 of the movie, really. Like the black and white stuff, that's the stuff that was shot on 16 millimeter. The rest of it is stuff that she shot on her high 8 film. And I think that was when they got into the edit bay that Ed and Dan realized that they might be able to make a whole movie out of just that. And I felt I had pitched that idea to Greg after the initial shoot. I was at my day job at the time, which was I was a projectionist at an art house theater in Maitland, Florida, called the Enzian. And I was standing in the parking lot with Greg, and I pitched him the idea of like, what if you can make a whole movie out of what we did already? And he was like, well, there was like politics involved and other, triggers had been pulled and they were on the way to get stuff made. And so it didn't seem practical, but I think that once they went and shot some of that stuff, and some of it ended up in Curse of the Blair Witch, which was the Sci-Fi Channel documentary that came out before the movie, which you can find online now pretty easily. When they cut it in with the movie, it ruined the sense of realism that they had worked so hard to achieve with those actors. Mm-hmm. Like, those. I always tell people, it's not a fake documentary; it's a real documentary. They just aren't like Heather, Mike, and Josh just know who's fucking with them. That's the only difference between this and Errol Morris making Thin Blue Line or something like that, is that everybody's in on it and they are acting, but they're also making a documentary. And I think that because whenever anything fucked up happened, they pulled out their cameras and filmed it like a documentarian or a news person would do. Like, it kind of keeps them focused in a sense and makes the storytelling a little bit more clear. I know it's a very long answer.
It's almost like a documentary about what it's like to get fucked with by a production team. It's like
it is.
That's basically what it is. With some flavor text in the background about a witch or something. Like I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the witch is the MacGuffin. It's not. The witch is just what draws you in. And I feel like every idea that we ever had that was like that involved showing the witch in the last scene, all of them would have failed. 100% of them would have failed, because to me it works because you don't see it. And I actually think that I know that Adam Wingard has said that, Simon Barrett has said that in Blair Witch that thing in there may or may not actually be Ellie Kedward. I hope it isn't. I'm okay. I know they had to show more than we did, but I also feel like when you start making it feel like a real thing and not just like an evil force that's out to fuck with you, it changes the nature of what's scary about it in a sense.
I think I've said this to you before, but the way I kind of interpret the whole thing, especially after Blair Witch last year, is there's a lot of weird shit goes on in those woods. Like, a lot. Yeah. And maybe not all of it is attributed to Ellie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe there is something else just kind of hanging around in there that's like pure evil. It's been there the whole time and has caused many different fucked up things to happen. But Ellie was the first one where people could put a name to it. That's what I'm thinking. Is it was that when she, whenever that shit went down with her and they left her out to die of exposure or whatever it is now, I feel like that was the first time that people had a name to give it. It was something that they could quantify now because they had like a point of reference. So to those ends, it would mean that basically anything weird that went on up there would be attributed to just the Blair Witch as like a catch-all term. You know what I mean?
Correct. Yep, that's what I think too.
So under that, I feel like seeing whatever it is that we saw in Blair Witch, because I don't know what it was. I assumed it was her, and I was one of the few people apparently that was okay with it, because I got shivers. Like, the first appearance she makes in Blair Witch, I totally missed. It's when Peter's out there in the woods doing something, and the camera turns and you just see it dip behind a tree. The first 2 times I saw that movie, I completely missed it. Just completely missed it. And then after that, obviously Lisa sees her outside the house. But when she's in the house and the camera's facing backwards and she turns it and you just see it in the corridor, I got chills. I was like, no, fuck all of this, you know. So I guess I would have been okay with it if it was her. But
yeah,
looking at it, like I said about it being just a catch-all thing, it might not be, and that would also be okay. It's just one of those things, I guess. I mean, never know.
It's my opinion. It's my opinion, and I'm one of the people who created it, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. You know, I mean, I think you could take it in any direction, and I probably have told you this, but you know, when we've talked about doing a prequel, which we talked about a lot, like right after the first movie, and it was to do kind of the origin story. Which I feel like if you see the movie The Witch today, it bears a striking resemblance to what we were talking about doing, although, you know, I doubt that any one of us had the skill or sophistication to pull off something as good as The Witch back then. But to me, what the idea that I always kind of clung to on that was that you have the Ellie Kedward situation, and Ellie Kedward gets killed and then freezes to death. And then sometime later, maybe the next year, shit starts happening, or maybe it's that winter, shit starts happening. But it's like, is it her? Isn't it her? I don't know. And going back to my initial reaction to Greg Hale pitching Blair Witch, the name Blair Witch, in the Bell Witch legend, which is Adams, Tennessee, everything bad that ever happened got called the Bell Witch. And there's a woman named Kate Batts who sold John Bell his farm, and they say that he shorted her or cheated her out of money or something, and so the Bell Witch was her curse manifesting itself on him. And, you know, again, like back then they would just call anything that they didn't understand a witch. You know, I mean, even as far as, like, you know, people who would divine for water were called water witches, and it wasn't even meant as like they weren't evil. They were people who were trying to help people dig wells. But it was called water witch, a witch, which is kind of a catch-all term for supernatural thing. So to me, I like that idea, but, you know, like, God knows, I think the new Blair Witch movie, since it wasn't a giant runaway hit, there probably won't be a Blair Witch 4, and if there is, who knows, it might be another 15 years from now. So, and you know, it'd be nice to be involved, but also I've talked to a few people. It's like I feel like I got to do my time, and someone else gets to do this too. You know, like if you worked on one Batman movie, that doesn't mean you get to work on all the Batman movies.
There's a
interesting comparison.
What?
There's a YouTube channel called Film Theory, and they did a theory on the Blair Witch whenever Blair Witch the sequel came out, and it was basically that the two guys had taken Heather into the forest to murder her.
I watched that. Yeah. Did you send me that, Reese, or did somebody else might have sent it to me?
I would never send you that. You know why? Because I could debunk that in one sentence. It was her idea.
Good point.
There you go. It was her idea to go. Theory debunked thoroughly.
Now, somebody sent me that, and I was like, I think it's neat. I mean, like, obviously that wasn't what we were thinking at the time, but why not?
Next.
So going back a little bit further in time, what made you decide to be a filmmaker in the first place? If you can, like, pinpoint a movie that made you decide, like, this is what's for me.
I can. And it was Clash of the Titans, the Ray Harryhausen movie. That when I was a little kid, I remember Ray Harryhausen was on like the Today Show, showing how he made the Medusa model and stop motion animated the Medusa hair. And I became kind of obsessed with how films were made. It's like up until then, like I remember seeing there's a really good ghost movie that George C. Scott stars in called The Changeling, and when I was I don't know, it's probably 8 years old, my parents got HBO and that was on, and I watched it and couldn't sleep. It scared the fucking shit out of me. And I kind of fixated on horror, but also like the Ray Harryhausen thing wasn't just a horror film. It was like this fantastic thing, and also it was like a really understandable technique. Stop motion is like you can explain stop motion to a little kid and they'll understand what it is. I mean, doing it is a different story, but just the mere understanding of it. And I started getting excited about that kind of thing. I know a lot of my peer group. I'm 45 years old. A lot of my peer group got hooked on the first Star Wars movie. I remember. I think I was just a little too young when I saw the first Star Wars movie. It didn't hit me the same way it hit a lot of other people. But I, kind of seeing that power in what cinema could do and how you could use it. And so I got into like makeup effects when I was like 12 years old. It's actually on this bookshelf right behind me. The Dick Smith Do-It-Yourself Monster Makeup Handbook. A friend of my dad named Bob Goldberg got it for me as a Christmas gift or something when I was 12, and I read it and started doing monster makeup on my face all the time and got into doing that. I was already into theater at that point, and when I got into high school, I would do if we ever had a play that required some weird makeup effect, it was something I was just excited to do. And for the longest time, I thought that's what I was going to do with my life. I was a special effects makeup artist on a few films, and Blair Witch was actually the first thing I did after I realized I didn't want to be a makeup artist anymore and kind of quit. Because I was working on, there's a guy, you maybe have heard of him, maybe you haven't, who was based in Mobile, Alabama, named David Pryor. And he made movies like Deadly Prey, and I think Deadly Prey is his best known. It's like his riff on The Most Dangerous Game. But I got to work as an assistant makeup artist, and then like a regular makeup artist and a monster designer on some of his movies. And his movies are kind of like they were designed to be straight to video, so they weren't always they were of varying quality. But he'd get sometimes pretty good actors to be in it, and it would be like the first movie I ever worked on, the first real movie I worked on, was a thing called Raw Justice that starred a then unknown Pamela Anderson. She was like only known as the Tool Time Girl. I think it was either before Baywatch or she had just started on Baywatch. And then like Robert Hayes, the lead actor from Airplane. And so David said to me once that it's like he finds people on their way up or on their way down. And I think he was actually a pretty amazing director, or his casting director was, at finding these people. Or he'd get somebody who was like a really respectable actor, like Powers Booth or Wilford Brimley, or like these really if you look through his movies, Charles Napier, like all these crazy respectable character actors that they get to come in for like a day or two. Or he'd take somebody like Leo Rossi, who, if you look him up, he's been in everything, and but he's usually a supporting player, but he'd be like the main bad guy or something. And he'd get these guys and do these movies that again, sometimes they were better than others. But they were a lot of fun to work on, and David was a cool director because you could, as an assistant makeup artist, I could walk up to the director and ask him anything I wanted to know, and he would tell me. And I stole so many of his moves when I started doing my own stuff, seeing how he was able to maximize a budget, seeing how he was able to shoot as fast as he shoots. I don't know if that really answers your question. I could go on and on about that shit.
It kind of does. Like, everybody who's ever wanted to get into film has that one movie that really like strikes them. For me, it's kind of a generational thing, I think, too. Like, you had the older films and stuff, and then the generation around your time had Star Wars. For me, it was like Ghostbusters, Jurassic Park, like that type of stuff that really got me interested in the filmmaking stuff.
I think Clash of the Titans was like 2 years before Ghostbusters. It wasn't that long before Ghostbusters.
Fair enough.
I think it was like 1982. It was the last movie Harryhausen made, which is sad because Ray Harryhausen only died like 5 or 6 years ago. I actually, like, I don't get super star fucking when I meet famous people, but my wife still tells a story of how, like, I was like, Mr. Harryhausen, like, I wanted to have him sign this thing, and it's like, Ray Harryhausen, like, he animated Mighty Joe Young. He animated The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and like, Jason and the Argonauts, and The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and like all these like fucking iconic movies, and really, it's funny because when you look at any movie Ray Harryhausen did, they're all Ray Harryhausen movies, but he didn't direct any of them. He just did the monsters and whatever. But it's like, it's because they constructed the whole movie around whatever creature shit he was going to do. So like, I couldn't tell you who directed Clash of the Titans, even though I actually do feel like it's one of those movies that was very influential to me, and I watched it. I got it on VHS tape when I was a kid and watched it a bunch of times, and like it's a movie that I really love, and it's got like Burgess Meredith and very young hunky Harry Hamlin, like pre-LA Law Harry Hamlin, and it's Laurence Olivier is in that movie. I mean, like whoever directed that got to direct Laurence Olivier and Ursula Andress and like some serious legends, and but it is known, and I think properly so, as a Ray Harryhausen vehicle. Like it's what he does. But I love that stuff, and yet, sorry.
You're dead on. I mean, like, you say the word Harryhausen to me, and the first thing that comes up in my head is like a bunch of dudes fighting skeletons. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
Jason the Argonaut.
That's the kind of thing that you are right. They are iconic. It's iconic imagery, and it is sad that he didn't make any more movies after that, because imagine what he could have done.
Yeah, it's so many of like my favorite movies take bits from Harryhausen. Like Army of Darkness, that entire final battle scene.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Army of Darkness is like, I think, one long, sweet, slow blowjob to Ray Harryhausen. What he does is such an homage to Harryhausen. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing like it. But I also think that like when Clash of the Titans came out, I don't think it did super well, and I think it was considered old-fashioned. And even though we didn't have visual effects and computer effects the way that we would. It would take probably like 10 more years before you get probably 9 more years before you get Terminator 2, and then like 12 more years before you get Jurassic Park. And at that point, stop motion is essentially a dead art. Not a dead art, but it's more of an art than a presentation. Like it's more of like you watch Corpse Bride or The Nightmare Before Christmas or something, because there's something cool about the stop motion now.
Yeah.
Because it's quaint in a way,
Well, the 3D on those, if you go to theaters, is so much better than any of the 3D that you see, like, with people. So.
Agreed.
So, going back to Blair Witch a little bit, because it's me.
I'll talk Blair Witch as long as you talk Blair Witch. Hey,
we'll be
been
here
17
for
years. Nobody's asked me too many Blair Witch questions since probably 2002, so go for it.
Well, I mean, I could sit here and talk to you about Blair Witch until the next one comes out, so,
That's going to be a long chat. We'll both be dead of starvation long before that happens.
Probably. No, what I was going to say is are there any questions that you get constantly that you wish you didn't? Is there anything people ask you that you feel you either would rather leave ambiguous, or you believe it's kind of self-explanatory? If that makes sense.
I do think that a lot of people like want real closure on it, and they want to know like what is it, who did it, and it's like it's folklore for fuck's sake, So to me, it's fair game that the folklore changes. It's fair game that in one version of, and that's why nothing that Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett did even comes close to making any umbrage come up in my mind, because it's like, yeah, it's a folk tale, so different people are going to have different versions of what happened to Ellie Kedward. I mean, like, even if you look at not to continually go back to the Bell Witch, but if you look at the Bell Witch historically, there's like so many different versions of it. Or look at any classic ghost story or UFO story, whatever. When it becomes folklore, it is kind of a pliable thing. So to me, the one thing that we intentionally didn't want to do was give people a very specific, like, oh well, here's the official version of events. Like it's a weird thing to dance around what is canon in the Blair Witch world, because there isn't really a canon. I mean, there is, and I think there's in more ways there's things that it isn't. Then you could say, well, here's exactly what happened, and you shouldn't have to, and everything should be questioned. So like when I got to direct the first special that I did for Blair Witch, which was called the Burkittsville 7, I decided, well, first of all, like part of the die was a little bit cast for me, because they said, we want to make a TV special when the first movie goes on Showtime. We don't want to talk about the first movie any more than we absolutely have to. We don't want to talk about the second movie at all. What can you do? And so I thought, what if I create a fake controversy within the mythology as we all understand it, and do a deep dive? And I was especially, like, I just loved the way the Rust and Parr stuff had come together. And so I did the Burkittsville 7, in which I have someone saying Rust and Parr didn't kill anybody. And, like, to me, that's it's like, well, it's like, that was 1941, it's like almost close enough to touch. Like, we have footage of this guy, we know what he looked like, we know what he sounded like, and he admitted to killing these kids, so what kind of crazy fuck idea would it be that he didn't? And so it was fun to concoct the idea for the Burkittsville 7, where we go in and question everything about it, and we have this whistleblower character who thinks he knows more than everyone else, and he's like we all know this guy. We all have met somebody who's like a serial killer nerd and is excited about, like, they want to tell you everything Ted Bundy ever did or everything Charles Manson ever did. Charles Manson, I know, was not a serial killer; he was, a spree killer, but whatever. And actually, maybe didn't even kill anybody. But anyway, I mean, to me, Manson is a good example, because you can throw a rock in Hollywood and find hit 6 people who will tell you everything that ever happened with Charles Manson. People are fascinated by this stuff. And what happens when they're fascinated is they dig and they dig and they dig and they find something that contradicts the canon as they understand it. And, can you lie with photography? Can you lie, and I was using, I know this is uber pretentious, sorry, strap in. But I was using, when I had become fascinated with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the old silent black and white expressionist movie, and the idea of an unreliable narrator. And that was like the first movie that ever really went nutty with, sorry, that was somebody just messaged me on Facebook.
You're good.
That was the first movie that ever played with the idea of an unreliable narrator. And if you haven't seen the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, it's all a flashback as told by this man to this woman sitting on a park bench of this crazy fucked up story about Cesare, the somnambulist, who's this guy who sleepwalks and murders people, and this doctor who basically has control over him, and they're like a carnival act, except the doctor is using him to murder people. And then at the very end of the movie, the guy gets up and walks away, and you realize that you're sitting in front of an insane asylum, and it's just been the ramblings of a crazy person, the whole story that you've just gone down. And so and this actually got cut out of Burkittsville 7 because we ran out of time. But the main character was obsessed, as I was, with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And I was trying to set up the idea that he himself, that Chris Carrasco, the guy who was telling us all that Kyle Brody was really the murderer, not Rustin Parr, and Kyle Brody is the kid that got away. I was trying to echo the idea that Chris Carrasco was a thoroughly unreliable narrator, that he had an axe to grind, that he wasn't maybe crazy in an institutionalizable way, but that he wasn't to be trusted, and that his story was perhaps complete bullshit, but also his story was of an unreliable narrator of Rustin Parr. So it was kind of like an idea within an idea within an idea. And to this day, honestly, one of the best realized ideas that I've ever personally had, where the concept I had got out into the world pretty much exactly the way I'd intended it.
Well, I've seen Burkittsville 7 because I think you sent me a link to it on Vimeo, something was it called, something like that. I saw
put it up on Vimeo's like YouTube, it's just better.
I thought it was baller as hell, so take that as you will. I enjoyed it.
No, I'm really happy with the way it came out.
Well, we're not going to talk about Book of Shadows because it's far too divisive. And again, I don't think you had anything to do with that one either, did you?
The only thing I had to do with Book of Shadows was when they made it, I was a general consultant on everything Blair Witch. So all the young adult novels, the video games, the comic books, the toys. There was a bunch of that shit that was going on. And so I had to read, they were paying me, and so I had to read everything and kind of consult with them. And in addition to that, on Book of Shadows, I also wrote and directed a TV special to promote it for Sci-Fi Channel. And Neil Fredericks,
Shadow, right?
Shadow of the Blair Witch, yeah. And Neil Fredericks and I actually got to go to the Book of Shadows set, which was insane for both of us because, the original Blair Witch, there's more camera and recording technology going on between the three of us right now than we had on the original Blair Witch Project. And then we go to the Book of Shadows set, and it's like, as I remember, it was like 100 RVs in a giant field around the warehouse, which was the main location. And they had a techno crane, and Nancy Schreiber was the DP, and she's like a named DP. And it's just like, holy fuck, what the hell? And this is like, they were making this in spring of 2000. the first Blair Witch had come out less than a year earlier. And so it was just like I had been, a year before that, I was answering phones for a living at a corporate headhunting company, and here I am on this $20 million movie set with Joe Berlinger, who's a documentarian whose work I greatly admire. So the only contribution that I can make any claim to in Book of Shadows is that they wanted the Blair Witch, that they were going to go back to Baltimore, and the Blair Witch was going to go with them. And I remember on the phone saying, think of the Blair Witch like it's the Bermuda Triangle. Could I take the Bermuda Triangle home with me? No, I couldn't, because it's in this triangle between, whatever, Florida and Bermuda and whatever else. The Blair Witch is it's in Pet Cemetery. It's that area that predates the Pet Cemetery. And I convinced them, thankfully, to not set the movie in Baltimore, because I think that would have taken even more wacky liberties with the mythology than they already had.
Did anything give you a red flag as to how bad that movie would be whenever you were on set?
Told you we wasn't talking about it. You troublemaker.
I know. Well, I mean, here's the thing. The first red flag I had was I got to see some dailies, because I was making this TV show, Shadow of the Blair Witch, and that was for Sci-Fi Channel, and so I got to see sort of what they were shooting. And they had recast the guy playing Rustin Parr, and in part because the guy who played Rustin Parr for us was a guy named Frank Pastor, and they simply couldn't find him because I think he was homeless, even when we worked with him. He might have been dead by then. I have no fucking idea whatever happened to Frank Pastor. So they recast him as this other guy, and I saw some of the footage. The footage I saw was them when they go to the Quickie Mart when they're on their way out. The obligatory Cabin in the Woods Quickie Mart sequence that's in every Cabin in the Woods movie ever made. And I remember watching it and being like, I don't know about this. Then the other thing is that I was originally supposed to do a completely different special, which I had written, and we had started shooting, and that was why I'd been at Blair Witch 2 set. Then the executives, I don't know exactly what the timeline was. I actually wrote a series of articles for Dread Central before the new one came out, and reconstructed the timeline, so I probably have it pretty close there. But I want to say it was probably late spring. I had a meeting with an executive from Artisan and my executive producer, and the executive basically told me what Shadow of the Blair Witch was going to be, and it was a completely different concept than we had already started shooting and already started spending money on. And I said, well, what about this other thing? And she said, we're not going to do that anymore. And that was the end of the conversation. It was like, okay, so that's how the big business works. I'd been in LA for a year. Mm-hmm. I was lucky to be working at all. And she shoved towards me 2 VHS tapes of Paradise Lost and Paradise Lost 2, Joe Berlinger documentaries, and basically pitched me the idea of all of Blair Witch 2 is a reenactment of real events that happened. And I was like, okay, so let me get this straight. Blair Witch comes out in July of 1999. That summer, some guy murders a bunch of people, and the following year you have an entertainment horror movie coming out based on those actual killings. That just seems morbid, and if I'm to sell the idea that really happened, that just seems gross. That's not scary, that's gross. If somebody murdered my sister this year and next year a movie comes out about the murder of my sister that's done for entertainment purposes, it wouldn't be okay. And in fact, they allowed me to shoot people claiming to be the families of the victims trying to block the movie's release and put it into Shadow of the Blair Witch because of that very reason. I was like, somebody would be protesting that you were doing this. Mm-hmm. And so they had me do that special, and it was kind of fun to try and copy Joe Berlinger's style as a filmmaker, which I think we did pretty well. And we shot it back then. We shot it also on film. We shot Burkittsville 7 and that on film, which is kind of bananas when I think about today. That conversation would never happen. But it was cool that we got to do it that way. And but yeah, and so when we were finishing that, I got to see Book of Shadows, knowing that the Artisan brass had been in damage control about it, and that was why they'd forced me to do a different special. And it wasn't just me; it was every piece of the marketing had changed. And this special went from being like a cool thing we're also going to do on this awesome movie that we're making to like, this better work. When I saw it, I was like, the bottom line, I didn't find it scary or suspenseful. And the other thing that actually, and this kind of made me a little mad, was Burkittsville 7 in great part is homage to a Frederick Wiseman documentary called Titicut Follies that I can't recommend highly enough. And we kind of paid homage to a very famous scene in that where a guy is fed through the nose, like a tube is shoved down his nose and he's force fed. And Titicut Follies is not a super obscure documentary if you're like a film academic, but it's not something people talk about all the time. And I'd seen it in film school, and it stuck with me because it's a harrowing film. Can't recommend it highly enough. And so they told me at the beginning of Book of Shadows, the whole flashback scene with Jeff in the mental institution, they literally lift the scene from Titicut Follies, and they recreate it. They shoot it like a music video, but they recreate the setup exactly the way it was in Titicut Follies, which I didn't do. I kind of made a scene that kind of had a similar feeling, but played into my story. They set it up, and an executive from Artisan was like, "Yeah, we also took your idea about using Titicut Follies, and we had Joe Berlinger shoot a Titicut Follies inspired scene." And I'm like, "Thanks." I'm not saying I owned the idea. It was Frederick Wiseman's documentary, but would anyone be talking about Titicut Follies if I hadn't fucking brought it up to these people in the first place? I can guarantee you that in the hallways of Hollywood studios, nobody's like, "Hey, let's talk about Frederick Wiseman documentaries." It's just not a thing, But maybe if all I did was convince some executives to watch one of the best documentaries ever made, worse things could happen. But it was just like that someone would think I would be excited that they'd stolen my idea. That was more like, again, like I didn't own the copyright on it, but it was just sort of like, why the fuck would you brag to me that you did that?
Yeah. I think my biggest problem with that movie is that there is no book. Like, there is no Book of Shadows.
You're right. There is no book.
No book, no shadows.
Yeah, I can let a lot of things slide, but the fact that they subtitled it with Book of Shadows and there is no fucking Book of Shadows anywhere in the movie, I think that ended it for me.
You know what that all has to do with? Have you seen Paradise Lost? Have you seen the 2 Paradise Lost documentaries? Actually,
No.
There's 4 of them now, or 3 of them. Totally recommend you check it out. I mean, Joe Berlinger is a phenomenal filmmaker. So there's a character named Damien Eccles, not a character, an actual human being named Damien Eccles, he went to jail when I think he was like 17 or 18 and got out when he was like 35 for a crime he didn't commit. And he became a Wiccan, or he was a Wiccan at one point, and he had a Book of Shadows. So that was sort of Joe Berlinger's nod to his own work, I think. But yes, I agree. I think that was an inappropriate title.
Okay. Well, pulling an extremely sharp U-turn away from that and back to the movie that you did have a good influence on. There is some... I figured out a question that I have not asked you yet, which was a monumentous task,
okay.
believe it or not. So it's known, again, you said before, she's kind of like the whole thing is kind of like a Bermuda Triangle of fuck, right? At what point are you past the point of no return? Say, for example, if all this is real, right, and I head up there for a camping trip, and I head into the woods, where am I exactly crossing a line from I can turn back and be okay into no, this is it, like I'm done? Is there something like that? Is there a point?
I mean, I sort of feel like once you go into the woods, you're kind of at whatever the thing it is mercy. There was a chapter in the backstory that really we didn't end up using that I always loved, and it was the idea that in the 1960s, in the hippie times, that a bunch of like Charles Manson-like hippie dorks got the book The Blair Witch Cult, got a copy of it or something that was supposed to be a copy of it, and created their own Blair Witch Cult in the Maryland woods, and danced around naked and did a bunch of peyote, and then nothing happened. And the idea is that it didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't choose them. Now, like, part of this is something that was sort of official canon that I realized had to be like jettisoned when they made the new one. and that's that. The idea was that it manifested about every 40 years. If you looked at the mythology, the Ellie Kedward thing, and then like 40 years later, you've got was it the Robin? It was either Eileen Treacle or Robin Weaver. I'm sorry, my brain. I don't have the chronology in front.
I think Eileen Treacle, wasn't she the little girl that got nabbed in the river? Was that her?
Yeah, she gets sucked into Tappy Creek. Yeah. So then Robin Weaver is the girl who disappears, and they send out the hunting party, and they come back, and that's Coffin Rock. And it was basically once every 40 or so years, 40-ish years, the shit would happen. So to me, it's like, right now you should be able to goof around in the Black Hills with complete impunity because Heather, Mike, and Josh went missing in 1994. So you should be, 20 odd years away from the next horrible chapter of whatever happening.
It was always something I would gravitate back to whenever I put any kind of genuine thought into, the whole idea of this area. Because I think largely that's why the film has such a fantastic following, because the idea of just having this tiny little patch of the world where you don't ever want to be, and you don't know why, but you don't want to be there. That's a really, really fascinating idea, and with the whole point of no return and being at whatever it is as mercy is also very interesting, because what do you have to do to not get killed? You know what I mean? Like, this is something. This is something in the new movie that I'd want to say I have a problem with it, but I remind myself about the folklore and stuff. But in terms of what we see in the movie, I do have a problem with it. And the problem is it's established early on and somewhat later in the movie. Again, it's kind of play on the folklore that if you look at her, you die.
Yeah.
How would anybody ever know that? Because if you look at her, you die. You don't get a second chance. So how the fuck would anybody figure that out? You know what I mean? Like, Lane, in the new movie, Lane ends up as what I assume to be the modern day Rustin Parr, right? He's been in there for quite a while. If you say that it takes him 2 or 3 months to grow a beard that big, then say he's been in there a few months. How did he figure out not to look at her? Did she tell him? Did she whisper in his ear like she did with everybody else? Was she like, don't look at me or I'll have to kill you? You know what I mean? It raises questions that I can't answer. So, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that again because I didn't. That wasn't part of the mythology as I had any construction of it, any part in the construction of it. And
I guess I'm just more interested in your take on it as a fan.
I mean, I don't have like that didn't jump. I completely understand your point of view on that, but this is maybe going a little bit too deep. But it's like, how would anyone teaching you about any religion be able to tell you about a religion? Because how are they going to tell you what happens after you die if they aren't dead? And I should add to that the addendum that I'm kind of a raving atheist. But that being said, I feel like how do you how do you have a character? Yeah, how would you know that? I don't know. How would you know any of it? I mean, I guess we had stuck with kind of concrete. Like the idea was to create a series of art again, because the original idea was to be like a History Channel special. So the idea was to create a series of artifacts that are unearthed or dug up or then just sourced by a documentary film crew. You go find the old woodcut of Eileen Treacle being sucked into Tappy East Creek, and you put that up, and it's like, it doesn't matter where that came from. That was an eyewitness saw a hand pull her down. You're right. I don't know how you square that circle. I don't have a problem with that addition to the mythology, but
I guess when I think about it, Lane obviously knew that was. He obviously knew that was how he didn't die. Some of the shit he said earlier in the movie, he knows. He's a Blair Witch fanatic. You know what I mean? He knows his shit, or as much as it's possible to know for sure. But he knew. But it's just one of those things where the more you think about it, the more you wish you hadn't started thinking about it.
Isn't that like, I hate to be like this, but isn't that most horror movies? I mean, I sort of feel like you could kind of you can deconstruct a lot of movies down to some level where they defy their own logic or they defy logic. I mean, all of your favorite movies, you could probably do that too.
Yeah, I guess so. I think the reason that it kind of stuck out to me a little bit more is because with the original movie, everything was so open-ended. There was no wrong answers to anything. And there was nothing that ever needed explaining because you would just look at it and, other than all the obvious stuff where, there was no precedent, basically, is what I'm trying to say. When you watch the first one, all the creepy shit happens and you just take it in. Obviously, you'll have questions when it's over, but whatever. But when you come back to it and you start playing with the mythology and adding little new bits and kind of showing things we've seen before but slightly differently, you can't help but kind of compare it to the things that came before. I think that's largely why I got caught up on it so much. Can't hear you, Adam.
And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen who are watching this podcast, that is where it has to end because our audio just completely screwed up at that point. So, Ben has said that he will come back and finish up the interview with us later on, so be sure to check that out. Also, be sure to like and subscribe if you liked this podcast and you liked what was going on with the Blair Witch information that we were delivering to you today. As always, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!